He thought he was safe in his own neighborhood. Just a man walking the streets he'd known all his life. No threats, no warnings. Only the familiar hum of the city. Then, in a heartbeat, everything changed. Faces turned cold. Words cut deeper than knives. Doors that should have opened stayed locked. Justice, he would soon learn, had a price. And it wasn't the one he could afford. What followed wasn't just a personal nightmare. It was a mirror reflecting a system stacked against him, against people who looked like him. The question isn't what happened to him, but how many others face the same invisible walls every day. But this story isn't just tragedy. It's a journey through deception, power, and the fight for truth that refuses to stay buried. It was a quiet morning when Ezra Whitmore stepped out onto the porch, the Rockies glowing gold in the sunrise. His coffee steamed in the chill, the scent of pine and earth grounding him. For generations, his family had cared for this land, worked it with hands calloused by honest labor, and built a life rooted in history, trust and sweat. Ezra had routines, rhythms that tied him to every hill, creek and fence line. His sister Della tended her classroom, shaping young minds while the world moved around them, unaware of the battles fought quietly on old family land. But that morning, the familiar hum of tractors and diesel didn't bring comfort. It carried a warning. Something was coming, something big, something that didn't respect history or honesty. And Ezra knew it. Every old fence, every worn path, every cattle track held secrets of a war he hadn't yet begun. They didn't just want the land. They wanted to erase everything he stood for. And when the first bulldozer roared to life, the fight became impossible to ignore. The first signs came quietly, almost imperceptibly. Ezra noticed the stairs first, lingering, cold, the kind that weighed heavier than steel. Walking past the neighborhood grocery, whispers followed him like shadows. "He doesn't belong here," someone muttered. At the bank, polite smiles melted into suspicion, as if every transaction carried hidden accusations. Even in his own classroom, Della faced questions she'd never encountered before, sharp as knives disguised as concern. It wasn't just unfair, it was relentless, invasive, and designed to make them doubt their own place in the world. Then the threats started. Letters slipped under doors with no return address, filled with words that burned like acid. "Go back where you came from. This isn't your home." One evening, Ezra returned to find the tires of his truck slashed, deep gouges cutting into the rubber as if the message hadn't been clear enough. On the news, commentators praised community safety, while conveniently leaving out the attacks that had begun against one family simply for existing on the land they'd cared for generations. Ezra tried to stay calm, to keep his daily routine steady. He tended to the land, fed the cattle, repaired fences, and watched the sky for storms. But the quiet mornings grew tense. Surveyors and construction crews began appearing across the road, not asking permission, just measuring, recording, and claiming space as if his family's heritage meant nothing. Della documented every intrusion, photographing equipment and collecting copies of permits, each one more confusing and contradictory than the last. Every official smile hid a kind of calculated coldness, a subtle suggestion. "You are alone here. You cannot stop us." One afternoon, the local sheriff, a man Ezra had trusted for years, arrived on his porch. His expression was tight, uncomfortable, and apologetic, as if the law itself had betrayed him. "Ezra," he said, voice low, "I want to help, but there's only so much I can do. They've got lawyers, judges, and rules stacked in their favor. It's complicated." Ezra felt a knot tighten in his chest. Complicated didn't cut it. They were being erased, piece by piece, law by law, with everyone pretending this was normal. And then came the official warnings. Fines for minor violations, citations for things that had never been issues before, and emergency orders claiming hazards that didn't exist. Public opinion turned, fueled by slickly produced flyers and social media campaigns that painted Ezra as the problem, a threat to the safety and progress of the community. Neighbors who once waved from porches now avoided eye contact, whispers of suspicion trailing them like invisible chains. The very place that had nurtured 4 generations of Whitmores now seemed designed to crush them. By midweek, the construction crews had gone further, bulldozing past the edges of what Ezra thought was secure property. Steel and concrete devoured the pastures, erasing the footprints of family history. The smell of dust and diesel choked the air, mixing with the rising anger and helplessness in Ezra's chest. It wasn't just land, it was identity, memory, and legacy being swallowed by machines and bureaucracy. Every snapshot of injustice, every bureaucratic manipulation, every deliberate slight built into a towering crescendo that threatened to crush him completely. Yet amid the chaos, Ezra noticed patterns, small clues others overlooked. Permits misfiled, boundaries misrepresented, water rights conveniently ignored. He began mapping the system, connecting dots that revealed a larger plan, a calculated effort to erase him completely from the land he loved. The anger that bubbled inside wasn't blind fury. It was focused, precise, and patient. This wasn't just survival. It was preparation. And as night fell, Ezra stood on the ridge, watching the bright lights of bulldozers cutting through his past, the stars above indifferent witnesses. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight. He had seen the fear, the threats, the injustice, but he knew the next moves would change everything. The next morning, Ezra would find a flaw in their plan, a secret that no one expected, and it would shift the balance of power entirely. The sun had barely risen when Ezra reached the edge of the dam, the roar of the water behind the newly built homes shaking the ground beneath his feet. Bulldozers and trucks lined the property like a fortress, but this was no longer about machinery. It was about the lies, the deceit, the deliberate erasure of everything he had built. He could see Della at the far edge, her notebook clutched tightly, eyes wide with fear and resolve. Tommy McGrath, the supposed neighbor, watched from the road, his smirk a mask for the satisfaction of seeing power wielded against someone weaker. Ezra's heart pounded as he approached the controls. Every warning, every threat, every insult he had endured flashed before his eyes. The injustice had piled up like a mountain, suffocating, relentless. And now, for the first time, he had the chance to tip the balance. One lever, one decision, one act that could finally speak louder than the bureaucracy, the whispers, the fabricated rules. He hesitated, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders, the generations of his family who had nurtured this land, the lives intertwined with every tree, every creek, every stone. And then the moment crystallized. With a deep breath, he pulled the lever. The gates opened, and water surged forward like a force of nature, both literal and symbolic, unstoppable and just. Machines stalled. Trucks toppled. Concrete walls cracked under the relentless current. People screamed, running for safety as chaos erupted. Ezra felt the adrenaline surge, but beneath it all was a quiet, steady pulse. Years of frustration, fear, and injustice transforming into power finally claimed. He wasn't just fighting for land anymore. He was fighting for acknowledgement, for dignity, for the truth that had been ignored for far too long. And in that instant, the world seemed to tilt. Neighbors, officials, and intruders alike could no longer pretend their actions had been harmless. The story of a quiet, ordinary man was now a statement too loud to ignore, a reckoning that had been decades in the making. Ezra had struck back, but would the storm he unleashed bring justice, or would it spiral into consequences he hadn't anticipated? The answer lay in the aftermath. When the water finally settled, Ezra stood among the wreckage, the floodwaters retreating to reveal the truth that had long been hidden. The homes built on his family's land were damaged beyond repair, the machinery stalled, the claims of power and privilege shaken. Della came to his side, her hands trembling but her eyes steady, and together they surveyed the aftermath. Not with glee, but with a deep, quiet understanding that justice, though messy and imperfect, had been reclaimed. The fight had cost them more than property. It had tested their resolve, their courage, their belief that the world could bend toward fairness. Yet in that chaos they discovered a simple truth. History, heritage, and dignity cannot be erased, no matter how loud the voices of injustice may be. Their victory was more than survival, it was a statement. A defiance against a system that sought to silence them, diminish them, and render them invisible. But Ezra knew this was not the end. Beyond his land, beyond his family, millions faced invisible battles every day. Fences built by prejudice, walls raised by discrimination, voices muffled by fear. His struggle had become theirs. The water had washed away what could be destroyed, but it could not cleanse the scars left by years of bias, nor erase the urgent need for awareness, action, and change. And so the question lingers, heavy and insistent. How many more stories must be written in silence before the world truly sees? How many families must fight to protect what is theirs, not just from natural forces, but from the relentless tide of injustice? Ezra looked out at the horizon, where the first rays of sunlight pierced the clouds, and realized that courage, truth, and persistence could turn even the harshest storm into a reckoning. The fight continues, but so does hope.